Hey everybody, this is the Raptors Weekly Podcast. I'm Samson Folk, and we are here to discuss the Raptors season. Here to discuss it with me is perhaps my most voluminous in number of podcast partner, Louis Zatzman. We've done many over the years. We did this very podcast last season. It was a Goliath of an episode that spanned almost 3 hours. People loved that episode. And I'm here to tell you that it won't be 3 hours this season because people enjoyed last season. They wanted to relive it, and hearing us recap every player, the scheme, what worked as the Raptors were this upstart team, that was fun. It won't be going as long this year because I suspect people won't be as interested in us digging back up all the negative emotions. We're going to start with Louis. How are you? You doing good? I'm still
I'm
interested in
doing
you as a
great, man.
person.
I'm doing great. I'm, almost happy the Raptors are out of the playoffs. It makes things easier. It was a long season. It was a hard season coverage wise. So I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. We played basketball today with a Raptors sideline reporter, Savannah Hamilton, the pull up Trey from Pull Up Trey, S, Aleg, Curly, like a whole bunch of the crew that we play a lot of basketball with. It was awesome. It was a good way to kind of kick off the day, but here we are talking about basketball instead of playing it. We're going to start with Nick Nurse. If anybody wants like an hour on this, I did a live stream. I just kind of was like, oh, I feel like people would be interested to hear this. And I just hopped on and started talking. You can watch that for all the Nick Nurse stuff, I think, and Masai's presser. But you wrote the piece that was like, hey, I looked at all Nick Nurse's stuff. What's going to happen? Is it good? Is it bad? All this kind of stuff. So where do you sit on this? Nick Nurse, the coach you've covered for years, is fired.
Yeah, I think there's some emotion to it, right? My first credentialed game was in his rookie coaching year. Um, at the same time, I do think other coaches are more forthcoming with media. So personally, lots of mixed emotions. I would have liked to have said goodbye or something, like shook his hand. I don't know. I know that's like formal and old timey, but we never really get that chance in this business, and that feels weird to be working with this guy like fairly closely for several years, and then not to just like he goes to a different he moves to Houston and I never talk to him again until Houston's in town,
Can
right? So
can I ask you a
that's
question
bizarre.
then?
Yeah,
Since you're close with him, let's
I mean,
what's the drama? You guys were, you worked closely, all that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah,
does it surprise you that he may have had drama with the players and his assistant coaches?
no,
No?
no surprise there. He's a tactics guy, not an interpersonal guy, and that was sort of the upshot of my piece. Is you may be wishing when you lose Nurse that you get a coach like Nurse, someone who has foundational identity, is able to implement it, has playoff X's and O's experience, tactics based guy. You may wish you had a coach like that when you get rid of Nick. But until you fix the interpersonal stuff, until you change the identity, the tactics don't matter because this team isn't going anywhere as it's currently taped together. And maybe it's so much easier to change identity with a new voice. So, ultimately, I do think they could have run it back with Nick and fixed things and been fine, but I totally understand the decision. And it's probably the easier way to improve going forward rather than running it back with him.
Who's more talented, the Knicks or the Raptors?
The Raptors.
I think Nick lost the room. I think he could
Yeah.
no longer get performances out of a team, and I think that his behavior contributed to that. A lot was made of players' selfishness. A lot was
Yeah.
made of that. And the players, as we'll talk about as we get into this podcast, certainly a lot of them didn't meet their end of the deal or expectations, all this kind of stuff. But Nick, I think, lost the room, and he paved the road to losing the room, I think, would be How's that sit with you?
That sits fine with me.
Yeah. Still, like, I think he'll be remembered fondly.
Yeah.
I do wonder if it went viral, right? Nick saying good luck with those guys. Being in the room, that was sentimental. That was, if
Yeah.
I can impersonate it, like, good luck with those guys.
Yeah.
People understood that, and like reporters from other markets, Twitter, it's fine if you misunderstand it, but reporters from other markets kind of reporting it as like him saying good luck with those guys. Pretty wild. Basically
Yeah. Inappropriate.
everything Masai said leading up to that was kind of forming the, like, he was saying it sentimentally, like he good luck with those guys, that kind of stuff.
He
But
told it as an anecdote about why he'll miss Nick
yeah,
and why it's sad. Like, you don't tell it, it's obvious. He also used that anecdote to dodge a question
yeah,
from Radio Canada about whether any players are untouchable in the trade market. And that's a pretty interesting choice.
yeah. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Probably we'll do Masai at the end for the people who are listening. I always timestamp the podcast, so no worries. You can kind of skip around as you please. Lewis and I do not have the ego that you have to sit down and for the duration. I don't. Well, do you, Lewis? You have that ego?
No.
Excellent. So, Nick, the tactician aspect of it, I think that this was a roster problem. Well, I'm gonna be honest. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows I've been railing against the Vision 6-9 thing since it was born out. Like, I covered what they did good, so did you, when they achieved things, why it worked, if it was sustainable, all this kind of stuff. It was pretty good. It was pretty damn good coaching from Nick last year to get it out of those guys. But rubber meets the road. It was pretty taxing, and it relied on guys a lot. They tried to change hierarchy. It didn't work. They had injury stuff. And as Masai mentioned, it was kind of like early December. They were like, maybe this team is different than we thought it was. They tried to save it with a Jakob Poeltl trade, all this kind of stuff. Nick is gone. We're going to be talking about this periodically, written pieces, podcast, all that kind of stuff, videos, until the Raptors make their decision, and then talking about whoever they, sign afterwards. Any final thoughts on Nick before we talk about the players?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah. It's you could write a lot about it, but because we have been writing and talking about Nick for so many years, I think we're both pretty comfortable with our stances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Pascal Siakam, probably not gonna make All NBA.
No.
Probably gonna miss out on $89 million.
Yeah.
That's tough. He is also the best player on the Raptors. For short stretches of this season, he was bested as far as impact, I think. But as far as on the whole, nobody came close. Last season, Fred's All-Star season, how much he carried at the beginning, especially leading up until like mid-January, some people started to consider the idea like maybe Fred is the best player on this team. Siakam came back, got All NBA, started out this season, was tremendous. 52-point game in New York, All-Star, all this kind of stuff. He put it to rest, and even as he slumped, and even as his defense fell off the proverbial cliff, he was still the best player out there. What is the flashbulb takeaways from Pascal Siakam's season this year?
I think we know what he can be at his best, and we know he can sustain that best for weeks at a time, which is pretty meaningful. I think the ceiling of his play, the best that he can be, took a really big leap forward this season. Even if his average play maybe only improved incrementally from last year, he definitely had lower lows this year than he did last year. Just what he was at the beginning of the year. I just remember sitting on Blake's couch with you, and the three of us were just giggling, just cackling, watching him. Yeah. And a lot of that stuff went away with his legs, with the structure of the team around him. Just no one could make shots. And also the offense changed a fair amount as well in conjunction with that. So, disappointing stretches for sure, but the best season of his career, and the type of player at his best where you can have the best player on the court any night. And that's pretty encouraging.
That's a great way to frame it, actually, is that Pascal Siakam, that ceiling, he outplayed a lot of the best players in the NBA. Certain games, he could get up for it, and he could be the best player on the floor. Other games, he would be neck and neck or, outdone by players that really shouldn't be outdoing him. Low lows. Of course, it's never that low when you're that good a player, but it certainly wasn't good enough to rescue the Raptors from the depths that their defense for a while took them, and then their offense for a while took them. And as good as he is, he also represents what the team doesn't have, and that's shooting. If there was, as good as Pascal was, it was I think 11 drives a game, shooting a really high percentage, scoring a lot for the first, I think, 27 games of the season. Really impressive. He's averaging 26, 7, and 7, and he's close to 50% from the field. He's the free throw. While it didn't end the season, the free throws didn't end well for Pascal. He shot better this past season than he did at the line last season. Things trended up.
And was just attempting way more.
Yeah. Free throw rate was way up for those first 27 games. Was shredding dudes. We talked about on the couch. At that point in time, people didn't realize the immensity of it, that Pascal Siakam was making Nicholas Claxton look ridiculous on defense.
Yeah.
But then Claxton went on to have perhaps, he's certainly in the vicinity of all defense defender. He had consideration for, defensive player of the year votes, all that kind of stuff. It was impressive. And that stuff went away. The jump shot. I don't want to cast too far into the future, but were you disappointed at the fact that Pascal's catch and shoot jumper didn't raise this season, and also the fact that he went away from it when that was what the offense needed at times?
Yeah, absolutely disappointed in that. And I loved what you wrote about Fred's jumper representing the team. You basically said Fred being at his best didn't translate to the team being at its best. And I think for stretches of the season, that was true of Siakam as well. A lot less than it was true for Fred. Not to conflate the two, just I like the language you use, so I'll repurpose the language. So that's the only comparison. And I think a lot of that was the jumper, because so many possessions ended up in his hands above the break with an open jumper. He even talked after the season about, I just kind of like my spot, so I'd meander into them and take a fadeaway. It's well, that's not what the whole point of the offense was. And
that's just not good. That's just not good.
If you can't take the shot that's supposed to be really good, then what's the point of any of the offense? Just ISO and take a fadeaway, just like you did last year. And the other thing I think that really was disappointing was his short mid-range touch just sort of vanished for much of the season. Went from top 5 or so in the league to just, nowhere near the best anywhere, not even close to anyone. And that was, that was another thing this is a high punch offensive possession. If we can get Siakam on the drive, taking that little 6-foot push shot, and that no longer kept its punch. And so very disappointed in some elements of his game, shooting those two really, but disappointing year, and there's a lot of other ways the Raptors could have compensated. So it clearly wasn't just Siakam, but when you bat 0 for 9 on all these other components that we'll get into that could have fixed some of the offensive issues, going 0 for 2 on the short mid-range and Siakam's 3-point jumper above the break hurts all that much more.
Everything compounded because everyone failed at the same skill, a foundational skill. And even the guys who just have never failed at that skill before failed at that skill. The end of the season, and we'll talk about this more with Fred and OG, but the end of the season featured more Fred, which put OG in more traditionally advantageous positions, and he had
He
a
was
great
great.
finish to the season. Yeah, because he was more so in a limited role. I think it was just hyper efficiency in it. But back to Siakam is just that going from 49% in the short mid range to 44% is, and I don't mean to be too drastic here, but relative to his shot profile, almost as damaging to his game as Fred's drop off from the
Yeah.
3-point line, because Pascal takes more shots from the short mid range than anywhere else on the floor. You lose
Yep.
5% of all your makes. That's tough. And he was much better in the long mid range. Like, he shot 41%. People made the big deal about it last season when, people cherry picked the stats and said, well, Pascal shot 37% on, long twos. He's one of the worst mid range shooters, actually, he and Luka. And it's like, well, the mid range is bigger than the long mid range. There's
Yeah.
different places to operate. He did a pretty good job of getting better in the long mid range. That's something he worked on, but he lost, and certainly maybe the touch to a certain degree, but it was about putting himself and getting himself to better shots in the short mid range. I just think his shot quality was much worse, and that was something to start the year where he could navigate to a better shot or create, a really good shot for a teammate. And as teams saw the lack of shots being made from the Raptors, they no longer helped from the bottom. They helped from the top when they sent doubles, And so the ball goes out. The Raptors ping the ball around the perimeter. They can't make shots. So Pascal is reinforced probably to take worse shots. The Raptors move away from something that should be a strength, and this all compounds on top of each other, and it results in Pascal, by the end of the season, developing some warts in his offensive process, I think.
He'll get to the rim on quick touches. Not a crazy amount, but he'll do it. Quick rip through drive and transition, catches on cut, stuff like that. In the beginning of the year, he was getting to the rim late on his touches. I forget the game or the team, but there was one play that really stood out to me where he isolated, drew a double, like escape dribble until the double team left, and then he ISO'd again and got to the rim for a layup. That type of patience was leading to extraordinary offensive outcomes in the beginning of the year, and that patience was leading to mid-range fadeaways to end the season. That's really all he was getting out of long touches. And the Raptors offense is sort of feeding long touches to guys, and none of them can do anything with those. Or a lot of them can. None of them were doing anything with those, and that hurts.
I think that's probably the most salient point that can be made about Siakam's season this year. But on top of that as well, like, the thing I want to kind of bring it around to end the discussion on Pascal, and we'll have a little bit more discussions, but this is a guy who, yes, he missed those. He went 1 for 3 from the free throw line when he had an opportunity to tie the game. Now, 2 out of 3, I think it was most people's expectations. Honestly, 1 out of 3 hurts bad. But the truth of the matter is, Pascal in that game gives you 32, 9, and 6 on like 60% shooting. He was
just on tough shot making.
Some tough shot making, but also the fact that, the Bulls, similar to a lot of teams this season, had a bad matchup for Pascal, and that Patrick Williams couldn't really hang, even though he's like sized. And on top of that, Caruso and any other glut of their kind of combo guards couldn't hang with him either. But some fadeaways in there, but also some decent process as a playmaker, I think, too. It represented part of his ceiling, the tough shot making, some of the process to create really good looks as a playmaker. But I think that's where, and I'll let you finish this after I say this, but I leave off of Siakam's season saying the ceiling is higher, decidedly. He has to become, and consistent is a silly term to throw at him because he is consistent, but it's just like, can he find that consistency of the higher gear? Like, he's consistently
Yeah.
good. He brings it. But
Yeah.
can he hang around in the age 29-30 season as the guy who's, going to be talked about more so as like a top 12, top 13 player rather than the guy 18 to 25 or something like that. And so he showed the ceiling, just has to be more consistent and has to be more impervious to game plans. And I think that is more dependent for the health of the team and his game on hitting more catch and shoot jumpers, particularly above the break. As simple as that sounds.
No, I agree with that. I also think, and this transitions well to other guys, the team built a really negative context around him. Even more negative. One of my favorite podcast lines to this day is from our podcast last year, where I repeat this all the time to you. You know what I'm going to say.
Yes.
Where they're like, Pascal, we need you to do everything. He's like, all right, what can you give me? They were like, the ball.
Yeah.
They gave him even less than that this year. And I think if the team were to build a more beneficial environment around him, he could be more consistent.
Yeah, I think probably, I know people who listen to this podcast revere Caitlin Cooper's work. People who pay attention to the NBA revere her work. People in the NBA revere her work.
People in this podcast.
She knows ball. And anytime I've asked her about Pascal, she is like dumbfounded by his ability to do things and the context he has to live in. And I think using her as like she really recognizes what works and what doesn't better than anybody who writes about basketball for public consumption, in my opinion. And she's saying, I can't believe Pascal makes the shots and creates the plays he does, considering the context of the offense. Yeah. Part of that context, Fred VanVleet. We've both written about him a lot. We have both lamented the season he's had, and then kind of noticed an uptick. This is something that by far the most polarized I've ever seen a player, really, is Fred this season. And I'll say it again. Do not project morals or ethics onto a play style to make someone into a bad person so that you can justify saying really terrible things about them. If you think Fred is selfish, fine. Whatever. Tough titties, whatever, however it shakes out. But the conversation around him is really toxic. And even when I and you discuss it as just purely basketball, just like see the numbers, see the film, sober analysis, you get nasty responses and stuff like that. I would ask people, please refrain from doing so. Fred VanVleet, tell us about him, Lewis.
Yeah, it was. I like the way you pegged his season as the barometer of Toronto's season. I think that, in many ways, he was the definition of the team. Even he wasn't the best player by any means, but he defined the team.
He was the drama. He was the failure. He was the uptick.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think him losing a lot of his defensive chops meant as much or more than him losing his catch and shoot jumper. Because for a while there, you just couldn't play him and Gary and Scottie at the same time because there were just too many holes and any breakdown was just layups. And that hurt a lot. And he bounced back a little bit. He had a good game against Bradley Beal in Washington that he knew was a good game. He was talked to Eric Koreen about it being a good game.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really good, impressive defensive game. I thought he was solid against Levine in the first half of the play-in game when the Raptors were overloading.
Yep.
And then they stopped overloading and Levine stopped taking step back jumpers and Fred started getting blown by. And there was, again, he is the lightning rod for how the season went on or ended, I guess. So, I was really impressed with his ability to find ways to benefit his team when things weren't going his way. He became like a driving god for a month when his jumper wasn't falling.
Would it be a month or would it be like 2.5, 3 weeks?
Yeah, that's short. Yeah.
I got to push back so I look good.
That's fair. That's totally fair. more accurate. He became one of the best mid-range pull-up shooters in the league for the whole season. When his 3-point, when he couldn't really do much at the rim after the driving fell off. His playmaking took a huge leap forward, particularly with Poeltl. But all of that stuff didn't push the needle as much as just his lost superpower would have. It's like you shoot 41% from deep, 43, I think last year, right? Catch and shoots. You shoot that again this year. You don't need to drive. You don't need to pass. You don't need to hit your mid-rangers. You're just pushing the offense that much further. A lot of the
offense that they wanted to be built around the wings, and
That's
one
right.
person's skill set made that tenable, and it was Fred's, but that part of his skill set wasn't present.
That's right. And so you end up with these bully drives and, matchup hunting for post-ups and, wing pick and rolls, which got nothing like all season. And the whole point of that is to get Fred dashing around off ball, and the ball ends up in his hands, and you're getting nothing out of that. So the entire structure of the offense, maybe he's able to drive and create something, but it's late clock. It's not as efficient as his threes. A lot of the Fred, stuff efficient for him was like 1.05 points per possession for his mid-range pull-ups or his drives or his passes. His catch and shoot threes were like 1.2, right? It's just you're losing a lot off the top end there. His off-court stuff was definitely sketchy, the way he complained about his role publicly. But it does seem like he held the locker room together through a really tough time. He remains the team's leader. His teammates do still seem to really respect and like him, even if the fan base doesn't. It's just a really hard year to judge. A lot of positives, none of which can outweigh the few negatives, I think.
It's palpable, his defense, because that was when everybody was worried about minutes. And actually, just a throwback to Nurse. Nurse lessened the minutes once Poeltl came in and the Raptors played a more regular rotation, just as an aside. But I'm glad that Nurse is no longer with the team, so I'm not really writing for him. I'm just providing context. So at Media Day, asking about Fred's minutes, a lot of people cared about that. People continued to care about it. He said, it's tough to give him those breaks because we don't have anyone else who can guard the point of attack defensively in the pick and roll like he does. Not only did they not really find that, for the short spurts that they did in Jeff Dowtin Jr. was the only guy who was better than Fred at it, was a two-way player. And that reflects not only Jeff Dowtin Jr., hell yeah, good for you, grinder, defender, good at it, but it also reflects how far Fred had fallen. You and I had this conversation about Steph Curry, if he's an elite defender, way back.
Oh yeah, we did.
And
no, it was never elite. It was just if he's a productive defender.
And so
defender, I think we said good.
What we settled on, and I used the on-offs to kind of make the quick point for it, was that Curry is only a positive defender when the context of the Warriors is positive defense, but he has little to no effect on if the defense is good or bad, if they're already a bad defense. And Fred has always been a guy who just like is a good defender and makes the defense better. And this was the first season that just wasn't the case. And losing,
context-based.
And Drew Holiday is an inconsistent offensive player sometimes. Truly, he is.
Yep.
You would know better than most people just how good Drew is. But the saving grace of Drew Holiday is just like he's maybe the best point of attack defender in the NBA, and that never goes out of style. And the Raptors, with Fred for a few years at that position, just had that guy who was so sticky on ball, off of it, and losing that, as you said, is probably the most consequential thing. There's a bunch of context-based stuff with his offense about how the Raptors wanted to transition the team and what it might look like, and maybe it's a little bit more future-facing and stuff like that. His inability to shoot the catch-and-shoot jumper definitely cut their, like, it hamstrung them in that regard. But it was the defense by the end of, like, the defense is where you lose so much of it.
And we saw how impactful great guard defense could be, not just with Fred, but in that Chicago game when Alex Caruso ate Toronto's lunch. Just his work in the gaps meant no Raptor could drive with him.
Mm-hmm.
And with him on the floor, he just was in the gaps every time anyone drove. He attacked Siakam's blind spots when he turned his back on like 2 or 3 ISOs in the third quarter, forced turnovers, and that was Toronto's life vest when they were drowning, and he just snatched it away from Siakam. He is not a very good offensive player, right? He's a pretty good passer. He's an okay finisher.
I think he's actually a worse offensive player than most people think. Like,
yeah,
Caruso has a larger persona than his impact, I think. And people are just like, hell yeah, they see him make a 3 every once in a while, but you don't realize this is a guy who hardly ever scores the ball. Like,
no.
Really?
But the thing is, they get enough added transition out of his defense.
Yep.
And he plays with enough pace that it doesn't matter. And he just needs to be on the floor as much as possible. And I mean, Caruso won that game. Like, Levine, sure, the offense, right? Caruso was the best player in that game. Or, no, Siakam was the best player. Caruso won the game. Caruso won the game.
Caruso helped immensely, I would say.
And
but I don't
Toronto
think
that.
I think Levine won that game.
We're quibbling. It doesn't matter. My point is Toronto had that.
Yes.
In Fred. And just absolutely lost that this season.
Yeah. Big deal. He will be back, I expect.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
We've talked a lot about Fred. If anybody wants like a full hour-long conversation specifically on Fred, he's the validity of the pick and roll after Poeltl was ended, I think just go listen to that podcast. I'll link it.
Yeah.
But Fred VanVleet probably coming back next season. Probably on a contract that a lot of the fan base will dislike, but I suspect with the cap going up will be an okay contract. And we'll see how all of this shakes out. Maybe a real offseason does him some good. We'll see. But he was the lightning rod, as you said. Scottie Barnes.
I also think, just before, actually to transition to Scottie, if there was another starter who could hit threes and who could put pressure on the rim, I think Fred looks a lot better too.
Yes, totally.
Like Scottie Barnes' inability to get his hips past anyone, starting from a standstill, also hurt Fred. And Fred hurt Scottie, and not stuff compounded, right? Not to point anything solely on anyone, but I do think if the Raptors were to improve other elements, Fred would look a lot more consistent, much like we said for Pascal to end off his section.
Yeah. But even still, I think I feel more comfortable laying those things at the feet of Fred and Pascal, even though they do so much, especially Pascal, but Scottie is really young. Pascal's 29 now. Like if a guy 100%. was going to be like the guy who steps up his catch and shoot game, you want it to be the guy who has these aspirations of a truly elite player in the NBA, like an all NBA level guy. You want that to be his final leap. And we want that to be one of Scottie's first leaps, truthfully. And we'll see if that happens. It didn't happen. He shot, 28% from 3, despite Nick Nurse telling me that Scottie actually was a good catch-and-shoot shooter. That was not true. Regardless, Scottie, one of the best passing seasons I've seen in a Raptors jersey. An up-and-down season defensively, a more up-and-down season in isolation possessions than it was last year, where it was pretty consistently something he could do pretty well. It was up and down. It wasn't as far down as people thought at the start of the year. Yeah. And I will say, just as like a blanket statement of Scottie, every single thing we say about Pascal and how hard his life is, that applies to Scottie. Only the Raptors won't give him the ball, and they walk him out there and they say, figure out where you fit.
Yeah.
And he does a pretty damn good job of it. Like, the context isn't friendly. The context became friendly for Fred and OG at the end of the season. It really did not feature a friend. It was not a friendly context for Pascal or Scottie. And Pascal is the better player, so he was the better player down the stretch. But as far as like relative to expectations, the guy who fit in better, I think Scottie played better relative to expectations than Pascal did. Like, I'm impressed with Scottie without a jumper fitting in. We've seen and will continue to see with Ben Simmons, for example, being a wing without a jumper and not being a guy who's used exclusively for like screen setting and diving. Trying to input yourself into games, it takes a very large basketball brain. You have to be reading your teammates so well. You have to be making the most out of the smallest advantages. And your shot making on the shots that you do take, the touch shots, the finishes at the rim, your drives, it all has to be really good timing. You have to find really good pace within the offense. And that's what impressed me the most about Scottie's season. Outside of him being, despite like not being in the top 50 in assists per game, I think just like an elite passer.
The thing that hurt Scottie the most was what destroyed the Raptors from within. And it was just an inability to get everyone to try hard all the time. Like, Scottie's game, more than anyone else on the Raptors, is based on pace and is based on creating advantages in multiple actions at the same time and taking a small advantage and turning it into a home run. Like, those like no-look passes in tight quarters in the lane, that's taking, to put numbers on, just random numbers, taking maybe a 60% field goal percentage look if he had gone up with it to like 100%, the dump off to the dunk. He turns silver into gold.
Yep.
And the Raptors created no silver for the man to work with. He is truly an alchemist, but they just gave him no medals. Yep. And he did really well despite that. But if you were to just toss him into a team like the Indiana Pacers, please God, don't do that. But the Pacers get so much stuff whirring around the court. Scottie would kill. Like, he would have like 20 assist games with 0 pick and rolls run.
Yep.
If he were a Pacer. And the Raptors give him none of that. Like, he would have possessions where he would start a play, get rid of it and cut, and like OG would walk around a pin down screen and Pascal would touch the ball. No. And Pascal would touch the ball in the post and hold it for a few seconds. And Scottie's already cleared to the corner, and that's where he's going to stay. Mm-hmm. And they just, if Pascal and Fred lost their superpowers in a sense from the short mid-range touch for Pascal or creation and the catch and shoot threes for Fred, Scottie's superpower was almost snuffed by a blanket, just by Toronto's meandering ways. And he still shone through that blanket. Like, he still did a lot of fantastic juice. But his ability is he adds juice, right? He doesn't have shooting. He doesn't have scoring. He adds juice, baby. And they did not give him a lot to work with.
That's probably my biggest gripe. I don't buy into the Fred and Pascal selfish. I don't buy into, but no. I do think on the margins, you can certainly make the critique that the Raptors as an offense and those who possess the most possessions, use the most possessions, they weren't proactive enough, and neither was the coach in giving Scottie those connective possessions. And I think the reason why I disagree with people about the way they frame it is like, you need Scottie to like take the ball and run like 80 pick and rolls. And it's like, no, Scottie doesn't create well right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a reason why Scottie's stats were better with Pascal on the floor, for example, right? Like, and quite a bit better is that Scottie needs the advantage created elsewhere. The thing is, he's an incredible connector. When I dove into all of his passes and just like did all the film and then did more film on Tatum and Draymond Green so I could kind of contextualize how special Scottie is, there's a reason why Scottie had more advantaged assists or a higher percentage of advantaged assists than Draymond Green and Jason Tatum's last 10 games. Significantly more than Jason Tatum, a little bit more than Draymond Green. Draymond has all these shooters, back cuts, pin downs, elevators, all this kind of stuff where he can just feed dudes. And it just takes good vision and really that synapses, like boom, making decisions, chunking, boom, boom, boom. He can do that.
Stat for you to support this.
Hell yeah.
One of the only guys on Toronto who just runs hard all the time is Precious Achiuwa. And for all of his offensive indecision, the dude cuts with the force of Hercules.
Yes.
Okay, so on-off offensive ratings from the incredible PvP stats. All games played, not just the ones in which they're both playing. So with neither on the court, Toronto's offensive rating was 112, which is quite poor compared to league average. With both on the court, with just Scottie, Toronto's offensive rating was 116, quite good, without Precious. With Scottie and Precious both, Toronto's offensive rating was 119. And Precious did not have a good offensive season, right? Like, we're going to get to him, but I'm sure we're both going to say we still are extremely high on him, even if it was a disappointing season, right? But his ability to just do stuff, run around, make the defense react, add pace, benefited Scottie so much. Mm-hmm. And you could see that because, neither shot super well. Like, neither shot well from deep, neither shot well at the rim. And yet, when they're both on the floor, Toronto's offense was spectacular. That's the
silver into gold.
That's the silver into gold. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just kind of elaborating further is that if you give Scottie, like Precious, like anybody, if they kind of believe in the offense and care about it and operate in it off ball, like you have to. I made this point on a couple podcasts. I'm going to make it on this one again. If Malachi Flynn, like if you run a pick and roll, let's say it's Fred and Jakob, and you have Scottie and Malachi stacked on one side of the floor, and Scottie is supposed to set a pin-in screen so that Malachi can be open on that pass from the pick and roll ball handler to the corner. It really matters that you nail that screen because Malachi will not create from a standstill if the guy gets around the screen. And Malachi has to be diligent in how he approaches his angles to open up the pass. And the guy in the other corner has to be like ready in case the defense overloads to the side of the floor that has now like 3 guys on it. And it's just like, you have to occupy the weak side. You have to occupy the defense. And you do that with activity and you do that with intention. And that's what the Raptors missed. And Scottie is the silver into gold guy that like, he's not going to get, maybe someday, but there was no reason to give Scottie a monstrous amount of pick and rolls to run through every game. There is reason to make Scottie, a touchstone, like he gets a touch on the offensive possession and you're cutting around that because why? Because more so than any other player on the team and more so than most players in the NBA, if a guy gets a smidge, like an edge off a back cut, if a guy has a sliver of space, Scottie is one of like 15 guys in the NBA who will put the pass on the money, on time, on target. And the Raptors just
go up and dunk on dudes.
Well, certainly if he has a mismatch, when he feels inclined, which is something that I think everyone hopes develops more so as his career goes on, when he feels the urgency to plow guys. Because that's like we've talked about this, but Pascal, if blessed with Scottie's sheer physicality, would like Pascal has, if Scottie had Pascal's mentality is like, I'm going to get downhill. Scottie is young. He's going to be like, I think he's going to be an all-star at the very least at some point in his career. I know people have loftier expectations, but the big thing with Scottie is using that physicality. And I guess this is where we'll talk about kind of the thing that didn't progress this season. How you weaponize physicality. We can look at Jalen Brunson, for example, at the guard position. We can look at there's a bunch of players around the league. De'Aaron Fox is that, yes, you have to have touch. Scottie does close to the basket, but you have to have the handle so that you can progress yourself around the floor physically. And at some point, you're going to have the jump shot, because Scottie just isn't going. He probably is never going to beat guys with quickness. I'm sure people will hate this comparison, but neither did Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce was physical. Paul Pierce had a handle that if you doubled, you couldn't take it away. And we don't have to worry about Scottie's passing. Scottie's the best passer on the team. It's like he'll make the reads he needs to. That's not a problem. But Scottie having the handle to navigate those situations when a bit of pressure comes that way, that is what's most important. And he didn't this season. Maybe he will next season. But that's why his offense, to a lot of people, it seemed like it stagnated. Truthfully, I didn't think it did. There was progression, man. Mostly in the passing aspect of it, but yeah.
I still believe in Scottie's stardom, future stardom, but it's not going to look like what people expect.
Yeah. What's stardom to you?
I still believe that he could guide Toronto to an above-average offense as the most crucial offensive player. That's going to be years down the road. But his finishing, like a lot of guys have like 2 or 3 finishes. Some guys have like 5 or 6 different, options they can go to. Scottie is like 20 different finishes. I mean, when he figures out his stuff, I'm not that worried about him as a scorer, even if he's never going to be able to just beat a guy in isolation.
You don't build a pick and roll offense around his skill set. But we saw the Kings set the record, the offensive rating record, with Domantas Sabonis. Like, you can be more creative than just a pick and roll. That's right.
There's more to offense than either running a pick and roll or standing in the corner. And I think I do believe he could really be a huge offensive leader, much more than he was this year. He has to solidify a lot of things. His finishing, even though he has the aesthetics and the different looks, he has to be more consistent. But they just need to get him more of those not in the corner, not in the pick and roll looks. I think a new coach will prioritize that, right? Like, that has to be very obvious to whoever's not auditioning. What's the word? Interviewing with Masai Ujiri.
Yeah.
You got to know that that's like a winning thing to say to Masai, right?
That's probably the first thing I ask if I'm Masai. How are you turning Scottie Barnes into a star? Yeah. It's like, because it's not easy to use Scottie, but once there's a coach who figures it out, everybody's gonna be like, oh, like that's exactly how it's gonna work.
And he'll figure out a lot too. Like, he will improve.
Oh, no question. I'm very excited for his year, and I think that, like, his teammates, Scottie, like, has to be more intentional on his own stuff. Of course, he had some of the development sits firmly in front of him. There are things that, like, other players developed quicker than Scottie, and maybe they could have been developed quicker on his end. Who knows? But the thing is that I hope that he and the team are both incredibly intentional about what this next year looks like for him, because he has the physicality, the feel for the game, and the touch to really turn into something special.
Let me ask you something. I have 2 questions. Yes or no? No, you can elaborate. 1, do you think he ever becomes a league average catch and shoot shooter? 2, do you think he ever gets the ability to just beat a guy in isolation?
I think no to the first one. I think league average catch and shoot. I don't even think that's really important. It's like, what does your catch and shoot look like? and what counters do you have if you're run off the line?
Hmm.
I think that's really important. So I'm kind of dodging that question, but probably not, and that's
That's fine.
okay. That's okay.
Oh yeah, I agree.
But can he beat guys in isolation? Like, yes. Not in the way that many people think of beating a guy in isolation, but it's looked different. It's going to look different, but it's also going to work. That's my stance
My
on Scottie.
player, my player comp for Scottie has for a while now been Kyle Lowry. They play nothing alike,
Only in
but
transition, as far as like finding the trailer that the defense forgot about. They both are it's like 100% of the time they hit that guy.
that's right.
Yeah.
You and I both hate player comps in general. The reason I bring this up is because when he does become a star, if he becomes a star, it's not going to look like what you expect.
Yeah. That was the conversation I had with Ben Pfeiffer when we talked about Scottie's season at the start. That's kind of the pushback I was giving to Sam Vecini when we talked about Scottie midway through the season. And that was the takeaway. I've now done 2 like massive deep dives on Scottie, but the big takeaway on the first one I did, where I looked at like everything, tallied it up, did a lot of film, was that this guy's going to be a superstar. It's going to be completely unique because he doesn't have the same. He's so unbelievably good at things that a lot of superstars aren't. He's also, he doesn't like Franz Wagner. Why does it look like Franz is a demonstrably better offensive player than Scottie? Because Franz has a pull-up 3 and Franz can run the pick and he can run the pick and roll, and you can kind of scale an offense around that, and that's really intuitive and that makes sense. Scottie, if somebody, a coach and players, his teammates believe in him and just like, and he works for it too, is like, if all those things coalesce, you find something special. I think that's Scottie Barnes.
Yep.
That was a pretty long one, Scottie. Let's talk.
That was the most important component, though.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Raptors, if Scottie doesn't progress the way that people hope he does, and if he doesn't get close, they're in a pretty tough spot.
Ooh.
Yeah, one of the toughest. Okay, OG Anunoby, an up and down year as well. I'll let you start on him. Wait. Up and down is wrong. Up and down offensively, so unbelievably consistently, like destructive for other teams' offenses.
Yes. I wrote about him becoming a star last season, and I described it as the type, like, it's not going to look like what you expect. And I compared him to other wings who average single-digit points as rookies. Just weird. For Giannis and Jaylen Brown and Jimmy Butler, some guys like that, late blooming wing stars who weren't heralded as that coming into the league. And they had massive upticks in their pick and roll usage right when they became all-stars. That's not going to happen for OG. That's not, neither does the team want to give him that, nor is that going to look like an improvement for him if that were that to happen. And that's where a lot of the up and down came from, is because whenever they tried to scale creation into his hands, it didn't look great. He process-wise has a huge number of advantages. Walking paint touch, as I'm sure you've said a million times, but that doesn't always turn into good things, right? Dunks everything when someone creates for him at the rim. When he creates for himself at the rim, not always the best. So, I do still believe Anunoby has real improvement left to his offensive game. Again, it's going to be different from what people expect. It's going to be a lot heavier on driving, I think, than like creating or pull-up shooting. But, I think they found a lot of stuff that worked for him offensively. Defensively, one of the best seasons, if not the best season in a Raptors franchise history.
Probably you're looking at Kawhi, Antonio Davis, and Doug Christie, if I had to guess. Like, when I wrote
Marcus
that,
All.
Marcus All, yes, I wrote that. Yeah, I wrote that in December that he was having at that point the best defensive season of any Raptor ever. He
Yeah.
finished in contention for that, I would think. Defensive win
Yeah.
shares, Christie probably finished ahead of him, but I wouldn't be surprised if OG was second, something like that.
And so I actually have less criticism for him than I think I had for the Scottie or for the Fred and Pascal components.
Totally, totally.
Just like, I talked about Nick being, if you lose Nick, you might miss that tactics, maybe as a coach. Toronto was, I think, the second most efficient ATO offense, which is insane when you're like a bottom 5 half court offense. For all his warts, Nick was an unbelievable tactical coach. And no, like, that's just like, his ATOs were amazing. But you might miss Nick. If you trade OG Anunoby, you will miss him from day one all the way until he retires, and then probably a few years after that. Like, he is so crucial to this Raptors team on both sides, right?
He's like, I think this was something that we talked about, was that OG's potential development at that time was hurt by the Raptors' over-reliance on his spacing. That
Yeah.
that his development had potentially been sacrificed for the fact that the Raptors needed, I think this season, per start, he hit the most out of the left corner. Like, he took the PJ Tucker stat and it became the OG Anunoby stat, right? Like, PJ Tucker with the Rockets always hit the most corner threes. And OG Anunoby is so dependably a guy who will create spacing. And then even on top of that, if you pop out to like face guard him in the corner, will back cut and finish at the rim, is just like the easiest offense. His true shooting was insane from March onwards because he had a very pared back role and the Raptors kept finding him good shots. And he just, hey, you hit everything. Thanks. That's awesome. And defensively, his defensive scene is probably underrated by the larger NBA, like the NBA at large, because the Raptors were so unbelievably dysfunctional this season. They were good, fourth, tied with the Lakers, I think, from the All-Star break onward.
Yeah.
But this is a team that Michael Grange brought it up. He said he had talked to coaches from other teams that were like, you don't really have to plan for offense against the Raptors. You get past a guy and then you score. And it's like, Jesus, that's tough. And like OG, you weren't getting past OG, but OG can't come from the 45 extended on the weak side and save the possession when it's on the other side of the floor. It's untenable. And OG, anything he was involved in, anything he touched, he pushed a team deeper into the shot clock. He got a stop. He created a turnover, or he made somebody hit a tough shot. And he just did it every time. He just did it all year. And the steal and block percentages were so high. He finished the season as the NBA steals leader. He doesn't slip up. He just wins defensive possessions in his sleep. He steps up for big games and like big matchups. You bring a superstar in, you don't even have to load up, and OG's going to make sure that they take less shots than they want to. It's just, he's one of the best defenders in the league. I hope that either next year, if the Raptors run it back, they should be good defensively. Really, they have the personnel to be a good defensive team. If they aren't, too bad, I guess. But
disaster if they aren't.
Yes. I hope that OG gets to be part of a good defensive team so that he can get some damn accolades, because he already should have an all defensive selection. And if they have like
2 after this year,
yep,
and he'll have 0.
That's possible. If they have like a top 7 defense, he could contend for defensive player of the year. And while the offensive creation out of the pick and roll, the isolation, we have 2 years of quite a bit of numbers on it. It's not there. And it's not there because the balance and the counters aren't there, and the pull-up jumper hasn't really come along. That's fine. He's still immensely valuable without it. Maybe there's less searching for him to grow that aspect of his game this upcoming season. I don't know how that will sit with him, but it's something that he's had a decent amount of possessions trying to do, but it doesn't take away from all the things he's just incredibly good at. He failed at things that are really difficult to do and that some people thought he might be able to do with bully ball strength creation. He might be able to overcome some of his finesse weaknesses. He didn't. Tough. Yep. He's still shooting 39% from three on high volume, and he's still a defensive player of the year level defender, and that's a wing. There's not another player like him in the league.
And he dunks everything.
Yeah. And so that's OG Anunoby. And it's just, I don't have, it was disappointing to some degree to be like, okay, I think we're closing the book on the creation thing. Because you want guys to grow and be everything, and we've covered OG since he stepped into the league, and it's like, man, especially the end of the 2020-21 season where he scaled the usage and the true shooting percentage didn't fall off, and there was like a bump in assists. He hit pull-up threes. He created looks for himself and others, and it was like, maybe this does scale. Maybe this guy's an all-star. Maybe he's an all-NBA level player someday. Didn't happen. Doesn't mean he's not good.
Incredible. The thing about the league is it's improving so fast.
Sheesh.
There's so much skill inflation from month to month, season to season. And frankly, OG Anunoby's improvement at self-creation has increased at a slower rate than the league-wide improvement. You see that a lot in less established sports. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a detail. I know you wanted a short podcast, but so
we're in trouble.
Professional Frisbee, which for those who don't know, I used to work for the league. I was the broadcaster.
He throws the B around. Team. Calls it a B.
B.
Shorthand for Frisbee. Throw the B around.
Frisbee?
No.
Whatever.
Okay, anyway,
so
go ahead.
But because the league was so new, the rookies coming into the year were often better than virtually anyone, because each year brings up guys who had been playing for significantly longer in their lives. And so you'd have guys who are 19 coming into the league with just more skill development than almost anyone in the league who's up to 30. And it remains like that for young sports especially, right? Guys who can watch Bo Kittredge, cut deep and can pattern their movement off that, they're not going to be as good as Bo Kittredge, but they're going to be unbelievable cutters from day one. And in the NBA, there's just like the skill coming out of the AAU and college and overseas is so preposterous that maybe you could cut it as a self-creator in 2017. You would definitely be good at it in 2013, but in 2023, that's tough. And Anunoby, I do think, has improved in a lot of ways in that area, but the league has surpassed him to the extent that, we can probably close the book on that, at least as a Raptor area in which he might develop.
I love that point. That's one of my favorite things I've heard all season. 100%. That's really, really great.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah. Jakob Poeltl. A short season with the Raptors for him, but a season. I would say, so I'm going to say this. I'll probably say this till the day I die. It was 3 a.m. I sat right here in front of the computer. Jakob Poeltl was just traded. In my sleepy stupor, I said, I think Jakob Poeltl is very good. I think he's going to be much better with the Raptors than he was with the Spurs. I don't think the Raptors are good enough to justify making this trade. Now, Jakob and the Raptors can certainly turn the page next season. They have to re-sign him first. First of all, they have to re-sign him. But this season, that was true. they weren't good enough to justify the Jakob Poeltl trade. That doesn't mean he wasn't awesome, though. Jakob Poeltl, I think Masai used the term top 10 center in the time he was with the Raptors. Yep. He was a top 10 center. He completely revitalized Fred VanVleet's pick and roll offense, like made it infinitely more valuable. He drew the tag that opened up a lot of OG Anunoby's 3-point looks.
Yep.
All these things are like very intimately intertwined. They are adjacent to each other for a reason. They impact each other infinitely. And he was tremendous defensively. Not only did he revitalize Fred's pick and roll offense, his presence revitalized the Raptors' pick and roll defense, and with Fred and everybody else. The Raptors will win way more games if they have him on the team next year. He's really good. And I have no complaints. Zero. None. He exceeded my expectations on everything.
A couple areas you didn't touch on that I wanted to mention. His short roll passing was exquisite.
Yep.
Really, really good. His defense, I wrote the piece. You mentioned this on a pod the other day. He closed off corner threes for opponents, which was a huge deal.
Considering where this team came from, can you believe a guy was able to do that? Just one guy?
I know.
And the team was still not like... Jakob Poeltl didn't make the guys care more. He didn't make the guys like... Pascal was still not good on defense when Poeltl was there.
We didn't mention that.
I said it fell off the proverbial cliff.
Yeah, that was rough. We should just quick adjoinder to the Siakam. His defense was a real disappointment this year. Okay, Jakob Poeltl. The other thing that I really liked about him, his ability to play at the level.
Yes.
I thought that they were doing him a disservice, asking him to fit into the scheme rather than asking the scheme to fit around him.
I think they both
they
came towards each other.
It increasingly, but in the beginning he just almost got no
Actually,
draw.
yeah, that's a good point.
But as the season went on, you're absolutely right. They gave him more reps and multiple coverages, but he was phenomenal at the level. He recovered to the right spaces. He closed off lanes. Anunoby especially was great gapping to give him that time to recover. Man, just if they don't re-sign him, it would be a debacle. But if they're almost certain to re-sign him.
Well, we were there at the exit interview. Did you watch his exit interview?
No.
So I was there. Let me tell you, among the guys who said they loved Toronto and loved everything there, Jakob was magnitudes lower. Like, he was like, we'll see what happens. That was... Jakob was not like, hell yeah, I'm ready to run it back. Like, he was like, we'll see what happens. Which, for me, I was like, is anybody else thinking this is maybe a problem? Because he came to Toronto to play competitive basketball. He wants to be in the playoffs. I think, oh God, I might start worrying people. But what if Jakob Poeltl, instead of Fred or Gary, Jakob was the guy they signed and traded?
Oh man, that would just be such a disaster.
Because
for team
he came to Toronto. Sources was kind of confused at the culture when he arrived. The change. Truthfully, he was like, "Yeah, what happened here?" He was surprised at what had changed, the tone of things, the way people interacted. He was surprised at it, and then they didn't make the playoffs. This is a guy who was in San Antonio, and sure, they had fledgling teams who got there and lost some series, but Jakob is good enough. Good centers play on good teams. Good centers play on the upper echelon of the NBA. We know this. The Raptors, they have to make a really compelling case to sell Jakob back here. I think they do. because it's not a fun team to
Wow.
be a part of. It's not a fun team to be a part of. And as much as like he had the good feelings and he's like, it's Toronto, I'm back, but that's not a guarantee. They have to sell, man. Like, not sell Poeltl. They have to sell him on the team and the city and everything like that. I don't think it's as much of a given as many people might think, which doesn't mean that he is leaving or anything. They have to pitch him, man. They got to make it work.
You kind of have to assume the culture changes for the better.
You got to hope, man.
Because Masai even recognized that as one of, if not the major issue. They fired the coach. I think Masai's working hard to address the culture. I don't think they're ever going back to the we're a family days from when Jakob was in Toronto last. And I even mentioned in my piece about Masai's press conference, did not use the word family. Used to love that word. Doesn't use it anymore.
This is why I asked you at the start if you thought the Raptors were more talented than the Knicks.
Yeah.
You know, just like that stark contrast is like, how does a team with a coach who's supposed to be a good tactician underperform everything?
Yeah.
People,
You walk through cuts. You all hate each other in the locker room.
nobody's having fun.
And you get real sloppy when their cameras aren't on.
Pascal stopped saying winning fixes everything in February. And he was running that thing back a lot. And and as much as like OG in his monotone saying, "Oh, I love Nick Nurse," you know, like at the exit interview, like it's, and everyone saying, "I love Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse is the best." I'm not saying Nick Nurse is the sole reason, but it's just like I hope that fixed it, and I hope that they are able to mend fences. We've gone off topic as far as like Jakob. Do you have any other Jakob thoughts?
No, I'm you got me worried at least.
They got to make it compelling. That's what he deserves. He's a really great center in the NBA.
Yep.
He wants to win, and he can also he's good enough that he can say, I want to play for a good team and I want to get paid. Like that's Jakob Poeltl.
By the way, in the last time we discussed Jakob, we were bang on, by the way. We said, it was the first 2 weeks or something. We said so far he's given MVP level production. It won't stay at that level, but it'll settle off to a really nice, very good rate. And that was exactly what happened.
So, talking about settling off, Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah.
I feel bad. He lost money, I think, unequivocally, the way that the end of the season turned out for him.
We're an hour and 13 minutes into this podcast.
That's
Can
right.
I ask you to be honest in a way that you might not want to be?
Yeah.
Do you think Gary Trent Jr. is in the rotation for every team currently in the playoffs?
You weren't there. This is I don't think people would be upset at me. This is a media room conversation from December.
You be careful.
I won't name any names, but that was a topic that was brought up. No, I wouldn't name names, but that was a topic that was brought up. Which playoff rotation is Gary Trent Jr. in? And you had to wonder, okay, is Gary Trent Jr. potentially more important to the Grizzlies than Dylan Brooks? Probably not.
No.
Is Gary Trent Jr. more important than a Brogdon or a White?
No.
Probably
it's
not.
Sam Hauser, right? He would play Sam Hauser's minutes in Boston.
Yep.
I have a friend very plugged in. Not plugged in. He's a big fan and he knows hoop. Jordan, you know Jordan. He's a great player.
Yeah. He
says
Reeves.
no. He says Sam Hauser would play ahead of Gary Trent Jr. in Boston's rotation.
He's a homer.
Yeah. I said I disagreed with him. But the point is that he was a 15-minute per game guy in Portland. No, he was more than that. But he was a bench.
Not true.
He was a bench dude in Portland, right? And has he gotten better? He's gotten better at a lot of nuance, which you and I have written about a lot. The whole league has gotten a lot better at nuance, right? The league is significantly better. Is Trent a better player now than he was in Portland relative to the shooting guard position.
Yeah.
He was what?
This
A
is
top 50 shooting guard in Portland?
top
Is he a top
50,
50
did you say?
Maybe.
Top 50 shooting guard? What, like,
He was the third best shooting guard in Portland, which was a bad team.
So, yeah, but that's like team context. Anyway, yes, top 50. This is funny framing.
You get my point, though.
This is funny framing. Yes, yeah, I get it. Because because I've had statements about Gary's game and sober analysis that people label me the Gary hater. I'll say this much. The salient point you made about the league progressing very quickly, so players need to progress even quicker to keep up, the modicum of improvement, like the moderate improvements that Gary made, that you and I covered, that like getting downhill a little bit more often, hitting that push shot, and that proximity to the deeper part of the court, resulting in more free throws, which he's great at free throws. All of that meant this guy could survive a shooting slump, and he survived shooting slumps. The thing is, though, and we're going to talk about this with Precious, we've talked about it with Pascal, we will talk about it with Chris Boucher, and we certainly mean it when we talk about it with Gary Trent Jr. The defense collapsing did those guys no favors. Gary can't, like, OG is like, I'll handle my business. You're getting good defense whether you like it or not. Jakob was the same way. But
yeah, Jakob was the same,
Gary is like, well, if we're getting bad defense, I'm certainly going to help you achieve that. And so none of the big holes in Gary's game were like handled. He still isn't going to get to the rim. He still is a guy who doesn't recognize his weaknesses in transition. He still is a guy who is not like, he's a below average defender at the point of attack. He's probably above average as far as being able to get his hands on balls on digs and stuff like that. But this is a guy who, relative to the other guards in the NBA, cannot keep up. And
the passing, man.
Yes. The passing, January of last year, he had like a 8-game stretch where he's averaging like 4 assists per game. A lot of it done out of dribble handoffs because the guy was leaking to the rim. Boucher, Precious, Scottie, whoever, right? And like that was good recognition, but there's just no passing from him. Part of that is the context of the Raptors, but also the context of the Raptors is one that dictates that Gary gets more shots and more opportunity than he would with many other teams in the NBA. And the shot making, the decision making was better this season. The shot making was better last season. If those two things come together, perhaps next year, perhaps in what will end up being his career year on a team where there's opportunity, I could see Gary being a guy who gets to, 20 points per game or something, which Steven Jackson did a couple times before he called Pascal Siakam trash today. Certainly, these are not the elite of the NBA. Neither Steven Jackson in his time or Gary in his time either. But Gary, his decision making is what helped him achieve things this season. And I really commend him for that, because it's not just like getting in the gym. It's how you apply yourself around your teammates. The unfortunate aspect is he got injured at the end of the year as the Raptors found a more defensive-minded identity. As inconsistent as it still was, he got left behind, I think. And I don't know what happens with Gary. I assume they aren't letting him walk. I assume. But they might also be...
I wouldn't be surprised.
Here's the thing. Norman Powell scored 42 points in a play. Anyway, okay.
Norman Powell is so much better than Gary Trent, man.
So the thing is, I feel like I'm personally going a little bit too hard on Gary. Gary, his decision-making improved. He's still a very good shooter in the NBA. He is a willing defender, even though he is underwhelming on that end. And he is, as far as a guy who said all the right things, and whereas other players this season took the opportunities to say, I don't like the way I'm being used. I don't like whatever. Gary Trent Jr., he got tossed around, and also was hearing it in media before he was hearing it from the coaching staff. Like Gary Trent Jr., for all his limitations, has never been discussed as part of the core going forward, has never been prioritized in media, in like the open commentary, and learning about where you are in the lineup from like all the glut of Raptors reporters tweeting the Raptors PR thing, like, hey, here's who's starting tonight. I mean,
That's tough.
He got jerked around, and like for all the limitations in his game,
0 times in his 50-minute press conference.
His exit interview was pretty short as well.
Let me ask you this though. I'm being much harder on Gary than you are. I agree with you in a lot of ways. He does deserve his flowers. As a Raptor, he will make $18-ish million, give or take, whatever.
Oh, the player option?
No. Just he'll make around there per year on his next contract. You give or take 5. Like I'm not saying I give or take a lot, but like within that range. If he was a Portland Trailblazer, he is making half that on this contract. Less. Like the Raptors having no shooting and no guards is so beneficial to Gary Trent Jr. that they can screw him around all they want. He's going to own a mansion in Beverly Hills when he retires versus probably still a mansion, but in maybe a less expensive place. It's a huge difference career earnings wise.
The context that hurt Scottie and Pascal so much was immensely helpful to Gary Trent Jr.'s potential earnings. Yes.
Do you remember Steve Nash getting all those guys paid an extra $20 million?
There's Kyle Lowry. We have that here already. Yeah.
The Raptors are doing that, but with failure rather than success.
That's funny. Yeah. Gary, his limitations as the year wore on became more and more in sight. And these are limitations that many people addressed and talked about and were openly acknowledged. And that's why the Raptors probably didn't, talk about Gary as part of the core going forward. All these types of things. They were trying to trade him at the trade deadline. They were like, let's try and get something for him. I wonder what happens with him in the offseason. All that said, he conducted himself like incredibly well. The guys like Gary a lot. He's a professional.
He's cool.
He shoots the hell out of the ball. He's going to get paid to shoot the hell out of the ball somewhere. And I hope it's a handsome contract for him. And the Raptors, I wonder what that looks like if he's on the team, all that kind of stuff. But an underwhelming year for him in what started out as a year where I was like, this decision-making is really nice. I'm glad he's doing it. But the stuff added up as far as his limitations. Precious Achiuwa. Stuff adding up. This was the guy. This guy who I thought he and Chris Boucher got the hardest. Well, Chris Boucher, Gary Trent Jr., they had the toughest time with Nick Nurse in the media. He wasn't afraid with any of those guys to say things to media that he wouldn't say to them. And they all took it on the chin. Chris Boucher, his exit interview was hilarious. He was like, I don't know, you get used to it, I guess. Like he was the only guy who wasn't like, hey, I love Nick. He's like one of the only NBA coaches I ever had. He's been foundational. Yeah. Chris Boucher was like, I don't know, you get used to it. Obviously, it's not great, And Chris Boucher is very forthcoming and honest. And we'll talk about him afterwards. Precious, 44% catch and shoot threes, around 5 per 36 minutes post All-Star break of 2022. It completely unlocked this dynamism, this duality between his driving game because of that pump fake, put the ball down, and he's one of the best athletes in the NBA, detonating on dudes. That was not present. And also, we all wondered, his excellent year of rim protection last season. Yeah. Is that replicable if there isn't the democratic rim protection where yes, Precious is the guy who contests the shot, but so is Chris Boucher, and so is Pascal Siakam. And they all had great marks as far as rim protection relative to expectation, which you've pointed out before is the more important number, but that stopped being the case. He wasn't the stonewall. He wasn't as consistent, particularly in his pick and roll defense. And the offense, we ran into this with Scottie, and this is why, again, it's impressive that Scottie did. How do you fit into an offense when you can't create and you don't shoot? And so what Precious did sometimes was try to create, and sometimes it went well. Most of the times it didn't, and he certainly didn't shoot this year. His defense was worse than last year. His offense was worse than last year, and this was a guy heading into his third season where a lot of people take a jump, and he regressed. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a tremendous ceiling. That doesn't mean he isn't one of the most unique athletes in the front court in the NBA, who has the foot speed, the balance, the explosion to keep up with some of the best wing scorers in the NBA, and for a spell, some of the guards. But he regressed. Unfortunate. It happened.
Yeah, another guy really hurt by Toronto's context. Also really hurt by Toronto's rotations. Phenomenal as a power forward all year long. Got no minutes as a power forward. Even though Nick kept on saying, you know what, I think he might be a power forward. And then he'd roll him out for 5 minutes as a center. Toronto would get blitzed at the rim, and then he'd bench him the rest of the game. It's like, well, you just said he's a power forward, Nick. Regardless,
he needs the collective rim protection. Like, that's
Toronto was phenomenal when OG and Gary were hurt. Better than I thought they'd be. Yeah, I mean, look, they won a lot of games though with starting that Yak Precious front court. They did great, and I think
good,
Precious
kind of funky.
has a lot of paths to success in the NBA. Even at his current, you got to build in a couple possessions on offense a game where he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he's going to jab step and hold the ball and kill the, even given all that, and even given shooting limitations, I still think there's paths to success currently without progress. The Raptors offered none of those this year to him. And he could still be an all-star caliber guy. Like, he has to take jumps in a lot of areas, but no one can do what he can do when everything's clicking. No one on the Raptors can do what he can do when everything's clicking. It's like you make bets on guys like that. That's the type of guy, when everyone says you tank, when you don't end up with a high draft pick and you're picking at 14 or whatever, and you want to swing for a home run, that's the type of guy you pick for. They already have, a possible home run on the roster. A lot has to go right. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed by no means, but you really have to emphasize turning Precious into the best version of himself going forward.
I still put the bet on Precious to be like very good. It will require, I think, if the team has more structure next season, if for the off season they say like, you're going to have opportunities this upcoming season to create a little bit, but they say, please don't work on that.
Yeah.
Like you shredded Joel Embiid as you are. And you did that because you were operating as kind of like a traditional big, and you got put into space with another traditional big. And like, that was where you were dangerous. Like you undid them. They started playing zone to avoid running into Pascal and Scottie and Precious, like kind of, using space. But anyway, work on setting screens, work on finding pace with the roll man, work on catch and shoot jumpers, and like having a more consistent defense. You're going to be back there again. All those things, Precious, I think, more so than any player on the Raptors, I feel strongest about him having like a very strong bounce back year. I think that there's a path forward for him, but he was disappointing this season for certain.
He's already one of the best 2 or 3 cutters on the team.
He's great.
And that makes up for a lot of the shooting stuff. Because a cut, even if they don't find you, is an offensive rebounding chance. And he's already one of the best 2 or 3 offensive rebounders on the team. That goes hand in hand, right? I get that his individual numbers weren't great, but the Raptors often were better with him on the floor. Even doing his weird, as long as we're being overly critical of guys, just Gary, really. Precious kind of played like he needed to learn the game of basketball afresh every day that he woke up. It was like Groundhog Day, but everything was the same except he just forgot the team's offense every morning. I think that goes away, right? That's not going to be a long-term issue. Because his timing is really smart on his cuts, on a lot of things, defensively especially. I think he's actually a really smart player. I just think not knowing the way an offense was supposed to go, like not knowing what the next action was, you can't account for, you just assume that goes away, right?
Yeah. The hierarchy and structure will support these Raptors. It makes you really wish for, I know some people think Monty Williams and the Suns offense prior to Kevin Durant was a bit too, like, we're getting here to run this action, to do this. But like, geez, the Raptors could use some of that. Like they really could, I think. And along with, we'll talk about him for about 40 seconds, Otto Porter Jr. Hitting shots next year, hopefully. Yeah, that's right. Otto Porter Jr., I'll to put the timestamp here. Maybe there won't even be a timestamp. He'll be back next season, hopefully healthy. When he's healthy, he's a very good bench wing in the NBA. We'll tie that knot up. Chris Boucher, the other Bash Bro, the Bash Bro to Precious Achiuwa's Bash Bro. I think the thing I say anytime someone asks me about Chris Boucher, and I will not relent or give any room on this, a good bench player in the NBA. Yep. Never, for even if he has a bad 3 games in a row, I don't care. Do not take that from him. He's good. He's a good basketball player. I don't care.
Yep.
He does different things in different games. He fills different roles, but he brings it. And God, did he bring it on a team that didn't bring it. Yeah.
Of all the guys who walked through cuts and who got beat and just stood there and who didn't fight on the glass, he was not one of them. That dude battled all year on a team that quit battling.
And the context hurt him. A lot of guys let tough context usher them into like an era of listlessness.
Yeah.
He refused, man. And I think it is palpable that he comes into every press conference or anytime he talks to us, and it's like Chris Boucher is super forthcoming as an interview. Like he's I asked him at Eggs and Interviews. I asked him a couple questions, but one of the questions I asked him was like, now that you're doing podcasting, what do you think about how the game is covered and like all that kind of stuff? He liked the question. Thank God. Yeah. And he said, like, it helped me understand what you guys do. And I was like, that's cool to know. And he was like, it helped me understand, like, the way basketball is talked about and kind of all this kind of stuff. And it was a good answer. But the other answer that he consistently gives is, like, my energy. I'm supposed to change the tone and the game. And on a team that was like, don't change the tone. We don't care. Don't change the tone. He did it sometimes.
Yeah.
And that is the largest for a guy who his defense was not at the level this year that it was last year. His 3-point shooting hasn't been at the level that it was in 2020-21. He's had parts of his game that were reliant on other players' creation come and go. And he's just like, I'm losing parts of my game and I need to find it elsewhere. He's just like, well, if I can't do this game, I'm going to go grab 4 offensive rebounds.
Yep.
If I can't do this, I'm going to do this. If I can't do this, I'm going to do this. Like he just put it out there. And I know, like, he makes mistakes. Sometimes he bites off more than he can chew. but he gave a damn, and
Yep.
he has talent, and he was one of the best dunkers in the NBA this year, for the record. I think the team, like, he would have been better suited on other teams, certainly this season. Could have been helpful. But I like his game, man. I really do.
I agree with all of that. Couldn't have said it better myself about the give a damn. The Raptors, yeah, you ever heard the expression month of Sundays? Is that an expression?
I haven't heard it, but it sounds like it could be.
I'm just guessing. I think that means like a good thing. Like Sundays are nice. Everyone likes Sundays, right? Relaxing days.
Sundays are good because they're associated with no school and no work typically. For people who are not involved in but I think that like feels like a Sunday. It's like a Sunday is like, I always felt like on Sunday it was like, damn, Monday's around the corner. It felt like Friday night and Saturday were the real, like those are the better days. So a month of Sundays,
the Raptors were a month of Tuesdays all year. No matter what,
you didn't want to infringe on Garfield's territory. I really respect that.
They played blah. They quit. They stopped doing stuff that succeeded. They kept doing stuff that failed. They were a month of Tuesdays. But Chris Boucher, for all of what he wasn't, was a Friday night. That dude brought the party.
That's pretty good. I like that. Okay, we've got half the roster left, but we aren't going to be spending like all that much time. Okay, the guy I think it makes the most sense. We've kind of been going in order of impact. Obviously, OG had a more impactful season than Scottie, but people care about Scottie. Like, of course, this is the dude. But we've been going in order of impact, basically. So I think the next guy to talk about is Christian Koloko. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, lead us off, because I took all the air on Chris Boucher.
Blew me out of the water. I was so impressed with Christian Koloko's season. He could be a really high-value NBA player. I mean, he just won all his minutes, man. He defended like an absolute behemoth. I mean, you wrote you wrote the book on that, right? And he got better when Poeltl was there, and he had the same role 2 out of every 3 games. And he just was a bench big who was asked to protect the rim, and he was amazing at that. And he continued to win all his minutes, even when the Raptors bench was losing all its minutes, and he continued to not do that. Man, I was so impressed with him. I thought, he didn't improve as much on the offensive end as maybe some people would have wanted. The 905, he wasn't like the best. He wasn't a superstar on offense or anything. But honestly, just a big who wins his minutes right out of the gate. What an incredible thing to have. So athletic, so athletic. I was really impressed with his rookie season.
Guys rave about him. He's well liked. He learns quickly, according to everybody. And I had the unique pleasure of watching Christian Koloko defensive film with Christian Koloko. I thought it was super insightful. I think people really enjoyed that piece for a reason. I loved writing it and sitting down with him for that. And he did the same thing, and this is a really good indicator, that Jakob did. If Jakob, who has kind of kicked around and been involved in the all-defense consideration, like an in vogue pick at times, the fact that Jakob's answers about his responsibilities in the pick and roll echo Christian Koloko echoes the same sentiments and kind of speaks to well, I want to be here on the floor and I want to make sure I get back to this spot, even though that's not the scheme. That's their that's their comfortability. They have a lot of the same sensibilities as defenders. They both did a lot better playing aggressive schemes than people probably would have expected.
Yeah.
And they both have a considerable effect on guys trying to make shots around the rim. That doesn't mean that Christian Koloko has Jakob Poeltl's career. What I do think it means is that he gets a second contract in the NBA just for the guy personally, that's the most important thing. For the Raptors, I hope he continues to grow to where, like, second round picks don't always get second contracts. David Johnson, what's going on with David Johnson? Dalano Banton, we'll see. But second round picks don't always get even the 33rd pick, even this kind of stuff. He's going to get that, and I think he's going to get more, and I think he's going to be an important piece for the Raptors into the future, whether that's an okay starter or a nice guy coming off the bench. I like him.
Well, let me ask you something, because we might have a differing opinion slightly. How many minutes per game do you think he plays next year?
13, 14.
In how many games?
50.
Okay, I think he plays a little more than that.
He's got guys to leapfrog.
At center?
Yes.
I mean, I don't think the new coach is going to think Precious is a center, right?
Precious is going to have to play center if this roster isn't juggled. Or it's going to run into the same thing that happened this season where Koloko started getting minutes ahead of Precious, which is a real thing that happened. So there's the log jam. Maybe that's something.
Too many power forwards.
Sheesh. Do they ever have a lot of power forwards? We'll see how that shakes out. I think, like, if the Raptors kind of juggle this roster up, many people are expecting it to be at the guard positions. For the structure of the roster, perhaps it makes more sense for it to be in the front court, but also that's where their best player is and their future star.
Yeah.
It's a daunting task to take apart these Raptors, but they are underperforming. Maybe they run it back for next season in the luxury tax and see what happens, but it's interesting. Koloko, we don't have to be right about how much he's going to play, but it will be interesting to see what the rotation looks like. The power forward who was too much power forward and was cut from the front court, didn't play the last 14 games of the season, has $1 million guaranteed for next season.
Yeah, he
won't, and I suspect will not be in Toronto.
Yeah.
Thaddeus Young. It is not good that his biggest moment from this season was giving Scottie a hard time, and Scottie, I think it played out in the exact way that many people think of, like, mentor and cocky young guy. Like, I think the people watching it, John Boy did a lip reading of it. And by the way, I'm not casting ethics or morals onto either of them. I don't care if Scottie was being cocky in the moment or if he was being the perfect citizen. I don't care if Thad was being hard on Scottie or if he was, like, being a super understanding mentor. Who cares? But that's the most notable moment of his season, unfortunately.
I mean, they wanted a vet. They got a vet. They thought their gold was gold last year. It was fool's gold.
They thought the no guard lineups worked.
Yeah. And Thad couldn't play defense this year, and his corner three fell apart. And if you don't have those two things, he was still, an efficient finisher. He was still a good post player, still a good passer, but just got blown by every time and didn't make a jumper. And so I completely understand why they mothballed him. I think the reasoning that went into the trade actually made sense. I just think that they were making that from the incorrect stance. Like, the reasons why they wanted him made sense. I think he helped the roster despite being another power forward on a team.
He helped. I don't think they should have made that trade. However, you can't deny Thaddeus Young helped them win games to end that season. Now, was that worth going from 21 to 33? Some people will quibble, but he did help them win regular season games.
By the way, in my off-season primer for last summer, I said the Raptors should draft Walker Kessler. I am not a draft guy. I did not remember saying that, but and so they thought they were at a place in the franchise, like, long-term building that they weren't actually at. And so even though he helped helping doesn't matter based on where they were. It sucks.
This is what I talked about with Blake as we, sat together and kind of did the shorter version of this podcast. Well, actually, it wasn't anything close to this podcast after the plan. And we talked about how, like, as you said, the Raptors thought their gold was gold, and every single thing anything that indicates future success, any number that you can derive from, the Raptors were meeting it.
Yeah.
Like the Raptors, everything, continuity in rotation minutes, internal growth,
roster age,
winning culture, roster age, everything said. And then I will cite this once again. I talked to a lot of people about the Raptors before the season started. A lot of smart people. Everyone thought they would be good.
You and I chatted when they were 8 and 9 or something. It was like the very beginning of the year.
Pascal,
and we were both like, this team looks good.
Yeah.
They tricked a lot of us. It wasn't just the front office they tricked. Thad, Thad's maybe a casualty of that. Can't blame him in any way.
No, it's not his fault. This was his 16th NBA season. He can be an additive if things are going well. I hope that, I don't think we've heard about it really, but I hope that the guys enjoyed Thad, and I hope that he had like a positive. I hope he enjoyed his time with the team, as it may have been his last NBA season, all that kind of stuff. Thaddeus Young, off to the side. I'm gonna do something controversial here. Jeff Dowtin Jr. is gonna go ahead of Malachi Flynn. Hey, that's fun. Don't say, well, yeah. Come on now. Let me pretend.
From you.
From me, yeah. Okay.
You're a Dowtin guy.
I am. I really like Jeff Dowtin.
So tell me the story on this season.
Jeff Dowtin. I'll tell you the story on this season. He was the Raptors' best point of attack defender out of their guards. Eric Curry said that. When I was working that 905 game, Eric Curry said that. And I agreed with it. Like, your 905 guard, unless it's Chris Dunn, you shouldn't be saying this is the best guard defender in the organization. Yeah. And yet, he was. And he just is. Jeff Dowtin just is. And as I said during the Fred part we talked about, is a reflection of both he and the team. Positive for Jeff, maybe not so positive for the team, because he is a two-way player. Casting no aspersions at Jeff. I think that he has room to grow offensively in the NBA. I do. I think that there is who you make this case. Is it Jordan Lloyd you use for this example? Who's the G League player you say, I thought this guy should have been in the NBA, and then I realized how big the gap was? Who's that player?
Lorenzo Brown.
Yeah. I think that Jeff Dowtin Jr. is obviously much better at the G League level than he is at the NBA level. But he beats dudes at the NBA level.
Yeah, he's a
and he doesn't get to the deepest part of the floor. He doesn't get a lot of layup opportunities, but he does pass up shots at the NBA level. Yeah. I think his defense can keep him on the floor to the point that he gets more comfortable. And Jeff Dowtin Jr., among guards, movement shooting percentages, is not above the 50th percentile as a three-point shooter. However, I don't think he's below the 40th. He can shoot. And he's a movement shooter inside the arc, which is a great indicator for his growth, even though he's 26, I believe, outside the arc. Now, I don't think he's going to solve the Raptors' movement shooting woes, but I do think that once he's comfortable with his hierarchy in the team, if he's a defender who you get the open shot, you take it, and at the back end of the shot clock, if you want to try and hit a push shot from 11 to 6 feet, do it. I think that he could be a positive bench guard. Now, it wouldn't upgrade the Raptors bench into like good or anything like that. I think he's an NBA player.
It's hard for G League guys to make the jump.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about Toronto Raptors 905. making impact, but a lot of those guys were sent down from the NBA level to get some reps seasoning. Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam. Chris Boucher is the guy, right, who started in the G League and made the jump to the NBA level.
And
they
I
had
guess
a lot
Gary Payton-ish Wainwright, I guess.
Not for the Raptors.
No, but like for the 905.
A lot of 905 guys, not for the Raptors. For the Raptors, I mean. And a lot of guys.
Maybe it's not such a. Maybe there's more disconnection between the two than there should be.
As much as I love Jeff Dowtin Jr., I think Saben Lee was probably the best guard prospect with the 905 this year. I love Saben Lee so much, man. Anyway, that's beside the point. But a lot of guys had an opportunity to make that jump. Jordan Lloyd, Lorenzo Brown, Malcolm Miller, Alfonso McKinney, O'Shea Brissett. That's
Utah.
Yeah, Utah. Yeah.
Because Utah was going to be 905. Like he came from the hustle.
Yeah.
He was going to be 905, but then he took it from O'Shea.
But Boucher is the guy who made the jump to the Raptors, and part of that is because he didn't pass up anything.
He was box office.
He played the way he played, and that's not 100% true of Dowtin. He changed his game, which is not always a bad thing. Like there's no normative good or bad to changing versus staying. But I like a lot of those guys who didn't make it with the Raptors, they changed. And Boucher didn't. And I think if Dowtin is going to make a jump, he has to be a lot more shot happy.
Yep.
He has to be willing to take a lot more of those looks.
Because you could feel it. The same way you could feel it when the ball ended up in Scottie's and Pascal's hands. On specific parts of the floor, you felt it basically when it touched Jeff's hands anywhere on the floor. That's bad. I believe in his ability to kind of ascend past those struggles, but I could also be wrong. But his defense is good enough for the NBA at the very least.
But you don't just have to ascend past it. You have to ascend past it in like the 50 minutes you get before they cut you.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. I don't know if he'll be back. I liked his season though. He made
Masai said he's part of the franchise. We'll see.
I do wonder, but he made a more compelling case than most two-way players make.
Oh yeah,
and I hope he gets. I just hope he gets paid. I don't like. Maybe it's with the Raptors somewhere else in the NBA. I hope he gets paid. Maybe Houston can use a young guard, or a 26-year-old guard who will be like, hey, defense is important. I like to do that.
Let's do
Dalano Banton.
Yeah,
27 points. Detroit. The most swing skill necessary player in the organization. If Dalano Banton wants to become, a guy who gets a second contract, if he wants to become a guy who continues to play in the NBA, has to hit the jumper. He's a sneaky good finisher. He's a willing defender, despite being a below average defender. And he has a good sense of pace. And I think for his size is at least, if not above average as a playmaker. If he has a three-point shot, he's a really intuitive cutter. If he has a three-point shot, everything makes sense. If he doesn't, nothing makes sense. I hate that it's that binary, but it's very apparent that it's that binary.
He's putting the work in. His jumper changed from his rookie year to his sophomore year. He totally reworked the form. I do wonder if a new coach comes in and says, look, the Nick Nurse shooting school is not what we run here. And you worry if how a new coach might affect shooting development.
I guess you could worry about that.
Seems small. Anyway, he's improved in a lot of tangible areas. His finishing was very poor when he entered the league and is, like you said, fairly good now. He's made a real tangible jump as a finisher against NBA length and athleticism. He didn't make an impact on the court this year. That's fine. I don't think he was supposed to. I do think he is trending up in a lot of ways, but like you say, there's a kill switch to that, and he's gotta shoot.
Similar to Malachi, a casualty of the no guard lineups no longer working. Because Dalano Banton, nobody else took on this nickname, but the Funk Fest Quartet that I tried to make happen, the piece was much better than the nickname, but Dalano Banton was a part of that. Dalano Banton was like fitting into those lineups where it was the Vision 6-9 thing last season. It did work in short spurts, but they won those short spurts by a lot of minutes. They didn't allow teams to drive to the rim, and they just rebounded 40% of their own misses, and Pascal Siakam was doing wizard stuff on ball, and Dalano Banton got to fit in there, and he really made sense. Once those lineups stopped working, Dalano Banton had no avenue to minutes. Zero.
And the other thing about the league changing, this year's team was better at offense than last year's team.
Yep.
Like, they scored more efficient offense, which is insane how, like, you can get better, but the league took such a jump that a playable offensive lineup becomes unplayable, even though it's scoring more efficiently. Dalano Banton is actually a really good example of just how the league, the shifting crevices are snatching some borderline NBA guys.
Malachi Flynn is guaranteed for next season. The Raptors made that decision in October. I think it was like October 17th or something. They guarantee his contract for next year, which is now this upcoming season. He's going to make less than $5 million, more than $3 million. He's going to be on the roster. He's not going to be in the 905. Where are you on Malachi after this season?
I think he's an NBA guy. I don't think he is in Toronto. Who knows? A new coach might totally change things that benefits him. He's had a rough shake. He's been a real pro during his time. I don't think he factors into Toronto being good or bad. Like, he's not. A lot of people are shouting, play Malachi, Look, you play Malachi, maybe you get some stuff, but it doesn't change the outlook for what's happening. I do think he will get another contract. I hope he will. I think he could help teams.
Do you think it's a minimum contract? I think that it
Probably.
would be.
Yeah, but I mean, that's normal. Second draft candidates get
Yep.
low contracts. You play well, you get a nice contract after that.
Jeez, Malik Monk, he's doing some things, isn't he? Not that Malachi's going to be Malik Monk, but just the second draft guy.
Yeah.
Oh, wouldn't it have been nice if the Raptors had signed Malik? Oh, my God. Oh, you and I wanted that bad. A lot of people wanted that bad. There's sometimes fans think a player is like a player, and they're so wrong. And front offices know they're wrong. Sometimes fans are like, just look at this guy. He's a player. And there's certainly, in the Raptors organization, there's people who went to bat and said, we need to sign Malik Monk. We can give him more money than other teams are. Like, we could get this guy in-house. He's really good. And some people in the Raptors front office said no. And then that's happening with a bunch of different teams. And then he signs a minimum contract. And then he signs a really cheap contract. And he is one of the best bench players in the whole NBA. He is, oh my God. He would have
He's not
helped
even
the
that
Raptors.
debatable.
No, he's incredible.
He's the best bench player in the NBA. Malcolm Brogdon, maybe. I think I like Monk.
Who's winning Sixth Man of the Year?
Didn't Brogdon win?
Did he win already? Is that
I have no idea. I pay so little attention to stuff like that. I can tell you everything about like a dude's crossover, but nothing about his contract or his awards history. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, anyway, he wasn't really in consideration for it. I think it's because he started games and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, Malik Monk rocks. I shouldn't have brought us over here, but anytime Malik Monk comes up, I love talking about Malik Monk. Malachi has, unfortunately, you said he's been given a tough shake, rough shake, whichever it was. This is a guy who had his game was built off of pick and roll. He was the best pick and roll player in college. That was He came out of the draft. He was He won Defensive Player of the Year in his conference, and he was the best pick and roll player in America, like the collegiate system. And the Raptors took him at 29. And he hasn't run very much pick and roll. He's been asked to do spot up shooting. He's had some very good stretches. He's had some not so great stretches. He hasn't been able to create off the dribble. He didn't get a lot of minutes with Jakob to try and stretch his legs in the pick and roll. Koloko and Precious are not going to reward him in that area at this point in time. Baines didn't. It's just he hasn't been allowed to grow his game in that way. And he hasn't met the lofty expectations of shot creation that he was asked to meet. And I think that his defense is less tenable than people probably thought initially. And that has been a 3-year development wherein he's had some good stretches. But I think that he isn't the Kyle Lowry or Fred VanVleet morph. It isn't the Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard line that some people thought it might be as far as defensive guards go. And he will not be adding to that lineage. It's tough. If I can recommend anything, Esfandiar Berahini did a really good sit-down interview with Malachi, where if there's a player you saw struggling, who you feel for, or if you feel like you haven't humanized them properly, go watch that. He's worked hard to get here. He probably will get a second contract, but yep, I don't know if he factors into the Raptors a lot next year. He certainly didn't this year. That's the Malachi story. Does that feel like the Malachi story?
Yep.
You want a bunch of players together for this last one?
Bunch them, baby.
So we have the shooters who actually, let me look up, what did Joe Wieskamp shoot from 3 for the Raptors?
Oh, God.
Because they like him. They like his shooting. 25%. Good. 21% from the floor.
2 for 8 or 1 for 4?
Let's see. Okay, I'll go to the totals. He was 3 of 12.
Oh, my God.
He took 2 shots inside the arc, and he missed them both.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's Joe Wieskamp. The Raptors brought him in to shoot the basketball. But again, he shouldn't have had lofty expectations for his overall game. He certainly should have, if he wanted to compel people a little bit more, shot a little bit better. But you can't really blame a guy for a 3 of 12 stretch. I mean, 3-point shooting is supposed to normalize at 750 attempts. And Will Barton, all of his threes came in one game, basically. He had, 7 threes in that one game? He is a guy who came in for the Raptors, had a pretty large role relative to a lot of buyout candidates. Yeah. He shot 33% from 3, 35% from the floor. I think you lose minutes. Those guys didn't change. They just didn't change anything for the Raptors. And then also Ron Harper Jr., who I think he has 1 NBA 3 to his name, I believe, if I'm correct. Oh, sorry, he has 3.
He improved
3 of 9
lot over his 905 season. He improved a lot, man. From where he started his 905 year to where he ended, I was really impressed with Harper's work.
And he's still not good enough to be in the NBA. We'll see.
No. That's not. I'm not talking about.
No, the point I'm making is that I was pretty surprised that he got the 2-way instead of Gabe Brown, for example. I was pretty surprised they gave it to Ron Harper Jr. Great.
I think the Raptors have learned from a lot of these guys that if you're a shooter with nothing else to give, it doesn't matter if you make your shots or not. Okay, let's say Wieskamp shoots 9 for 12. That doesn't matter. He still shouldn't be playing in Toronto's rotation. And they learned that with Svi Mykhailiuk, with Malcolm Miller. They keep making bets on their main guys not shooting and having number 12 in the rotation. We can add some shooting there. But it doesn't all sum up to the total. There's only 5 guys on the floor. And if you're playing the 13th guy, it means the 6th guy isn't playing. And they keep trying to add shooting from places where it doesn't exist because they're just not going to be playing. And if Masai, he talked about adding shooting, he still believes on betting in-house. If that means signing another guy who played 400 NBA minutes over the last season, that would be so frustrating in terms of thinking that could be a solution.
Do you think Ron, because I understand like at Rutgers, he had creation reps. He had obviously creation reps at the 905 level.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. I didn't think it was like a ton of juice. Like, do you think like Ron Harper's creation reps are like the difference between he and Gabe Brown, for example, is like I think he was
significantly better than Gabe Brown by the end of the 905 season. I don't think he factors into the Raptors now or in the future.
Just guys getting looks.
Yeah, and he improved a lot. Good for him. I wanted to mention it, right? I don't think he plays for the Raptors, really.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I guess, yeah. Will Barton, any thoughts?
Would it be nice to make some threes?
Not back next year, I would assume.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other Raptors things you want to talk about? Are you interested in anything?
Juancho. Man.
Oh, yeah, Juancho. Oh, yeah, let's do Juancho and Khem Birch. I think Juancho is great. I loved the subplot of the season where every time Thad Young passed him the ball, he scored. That was one of my favorite pieces I wrote, and just like a devilishly fun thing to dive into. Khem Birch, I think, somehow managed to have positive defensive performances with his brain, despite his body just completely failing him. And I think that's a really great indicator of how he sees the game. And maybe he becomes like a really good big man coach or something like that. But I don't know if Khem is for the NBA much longer.
Yeah.
Even though he has another year on his deal. San Antonio is on the hook for $6 million.
I didn't see him helping the Raptors culture towards that trade deadline. I saw Khem sitting out of huddles.
Yeah.
Not high-fiving guys.
You should have written about that. Khem Birch isn't high-fiving guys.
You know.
For the podcast listeners, I'm smiling and being facetious. I don't mean that.
But it was like the culture broke in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And, nothing is at fault. Like, Khem's not at fault, man. That dude had a rough season in a lot of ways. Like, poor guy. I think he was a victim much more than he was a perpetrator of Toronto's culture. But that's how it shakes out, right? That's what happened this year.
These are the breaks. Bring it up, bring it up, bring it up.
These are the breaks.
Yeah. The Raptors. I think I got like a coffee grind in my throat or something. I feel that. I wasn't going to have to edit any part of the podcast, but I do now.
I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
Your first year on the beat, your first year in Toronto, obviously not the year from the Raptors you wanted, but I wanted to ask you how it went. How do you feel about your season? I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about that.
It was good.
That's what I'm getting.
I thought it'd be funny. I enjoyed it immensely. It was such a cool year to finally. There are some like hallmark moments that like in coverage I got to do. I got to have conversations with players that I really wanted to have. I thought everybody. I know like Toronto media is certainly not perfect. I think there are people in media who sometimes say things I'm like, damn, I wish you didn't say that. I think that they are maligned by the fan base, certainly. I'm here to tell you, I met so many of them. There's a lot of really great people there. And despite disagreeing with their basketball takes, as long as they're not dehumanizing the athletes, I would urge compassion. I met them after being, far away for so long. Really nice people. Very accepting. Helped me and I saw them help a lot of people get into it. Even the Raptors beat is like a changing one and a growing one. There's a lot of shaking and moving. It was really rewarding to be a part of it because the beat is, it's collaborative. Pressers are collaborative. All that stuff is like, to not have a single problem all year with any colleagues or anything like that is really nice. And you wonder about stuff like that. You wonder about fitting in, and you wonder about kind of not ruffling feathers. PR, I think the people at PR liked me, and I had like a bunch of good interactions with them, and that was nice. And it's just nice. That's anything I do. As long as the people are good, fans were really nice. People were really nice about my work. People supported it with their money, and they've never had to do that in the past, and they did. They supported your work with the money. That was really meaningful. I had double digits amount of people stop me in Toronto and say, Samson Folk. And that's like a weird and super cool thing. Like very humbling, and just talk to you about like, I like your work. I like this kind of thing. And there are other jobs that pay better, but very few of them will allow that to happen. I don't know if that makes up for the gap in pay or anything like that, but it's cool to put your stuff out into the world and to have people, not even by email, which thank you to the people who do, or, Twitter DMs or anything like that, just say like, I appreciate what you do. And to get that in person is because I'm in Toronto. And the conversations I had with the players and coaches is because I'm in Toronto. And that's why I moved here, to do that. And Raptors Republic gave me the credential to do so. And that's pretty cool. I'm excited to do it again.
Amazing. Love that. Thank you.
Is that better than
better? So much better.
That's better than good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, hey, let's ask you. Let's dive even further into this self-indulgence. What did you think about me on the beat?
About you.
Don't answer that. Yeah. Is there anything else? How did you enjoy yours?
Yeah, I mean, it was a new year for me, right? First season with
me.
With a baby? How old
is
my baby?
That's true.
No, last season I would have had the baby too, right?
Halfway through.
Yeah.
January.
Yeah. You can tell. Not a lot of sleep.
You're a dad.
No, it's just a different year, obviously. Really good working with the transition. Loved working with you. Your work's amazing. So happy to share Raptors Republic space with you. And a lot of other writers that are and podcasters, phenomenal as well. No, I was just, man, we're very lucky to be able to do what we do.
Happy as a clam.
We're very lucky.
Does that feel like a podcast?
Yeah. Gratefulness is a great feeling.
Even
in a hard year for the Raptors, still a lot of joy for fans, writers, podcasters, because sports are fun even when they're not.
I think this is more meaningful than it was last year. I said last year at the end of the podcast, tweet swordfish at me if you're at this point in the podcast, and I will follow you back. If the Raptors are really good, more people pay attention to coverage. Podcasts, written work, videos, whatever. In a down year for the Raptors, less people paid attention. You can see this basically by any metric anywhere, any website, tweets, anything. For the people who are listening now, thank you, because I assume you probably listened all year. And you're not fans of us, but you are listeners and you are readers and you make what we do viable. And we think we do good work, but you being there is what makes it viable. So thank you to whoever's listening. Yeah, that feels like a good place to end it. Thank you to the Raptors for existing as entertainment and a sport that allows for this, I guess, type of economy. And genuinely, we profit off of the players in a way. And so I appreciate them always. And I try to just, thanks to those guys and for the time they take out to speak to us, because the media is built off of the backs of the players. And while it's tough to have like perfect interactions and all that kind of stuff. They're the reason anybody's here. We're an adjacent thing to them. So thank you to the players for being there, making the league, making this something everybody can come together and enjoy. Maybe not just the Raptors, but the players at large. That feel like a podcast? Good place to end it?
That's a podcast, baby.
That's a podcast. Ladies and gents, people of the world who are listening, if you're watching this on YouTube, like the video, subscribe. The most important one is to subscribe over at raptorsrepublic.com. And when I say the most important, jeez, do I ever mean it. That is the one. And if you're listening on the podcast channel, thanks for chopping it up with us. For myself and for Lewis, whether you got into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day and goodbye.